Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Herman from Kooij, and I would like to thank the organizers, in particular Arco, for setting up the session and for inviting me in this beautiful resort. Normally I work 4 days at Twente University and another day at Delft University, but this year I'm staying at IVL in the group of Auke IJsbeert Biorobotics group. In my group we have many projects, and in those projects we use robots to better understand normal and impaired human motor control, and also apply those system identification techniques that Tim talked about. And the idea is then to transform and apply this knowledge into the development of, for example, therapeutic robots, and also lately assistive devices like wearable exoskeletons. But today I will talk about sensory integration, imbalance control, postural control, and this is a very simplistic scheme about the nature of the problem. So the idea is that the brain receives delayed and sensory noise information that it has to integrate and then tune the muscle responses to maintain balance. And our idea on this problem is that the brain tries to minimize the effects of internal noise sources like motor noise and sensory noise, and also the external perturbations exposed by the environments to minimize some kind of criterion, like a minimization of body sway or effort. And the talk will be about how to model this, and also will present some experimental data collected by our group, and also data from Bob Turka. But before talking about sensory integration, I first want to consider another explanation, how we humans maintain balance during stance. Because gravity you could consider as a kind of negative spring, a gravitational stiffness. And if you have some kind of other stiffness, for example the stiffness that are caused by activating our muscles, then maybe the only thing we have to do is activate those muscles and utilize the stiffness that are an inherent property of our muscles to just counteract gravity. And there was some debate in literature about 10 years ago whether this would be sufficient just to stabilize yourselves. And then, if this will be possible, then you don't need to do very complicated stuff like sensory integration and sensory fusion. So to investigate whether this intrinsic muscle stiffness is sufficient to stabilize human posture, so to counteract the gravitational stiffness, we developed this kind of bilateral ankle perturbator. And the nice thing about this perturbator is that it's super fast. It can perturb your ankles so fast that you can measure the response, the torque response evoked by this perturbation before those reflexes, those sensory feedback kick in. So you can measure the stiffness within 50 milliseconds. Then you're sure that you only measure the muscle and no neural feedback. And if you do this, and if you then plot the ankle stiffness as a function of the perturbation amplitude, so the ankle rotation, you see two things. That if the amplitude becomes larger, then also stiffness becomes smaller. But you can also see that the stiffness is always lower than 1. And I normalize the stiffness here against the gravitational stiffness, so and you see that it is always too small. So it's not sufficient on Earth just to co-activate your muscles around your ankle and exploit the stiffness. So we have to do something more advanced. So we have to utilize our sensory feedback pathways. And well, if you think about sensory feedback during stance and also during walking, there are I think three important systems. It's the visual system, the vestibular system, and the proprioceptive system. And maybe some of you are not aware of those senses that we all have in our body, like the Golgi tendon organs. They are in the tendons and they sense the tendon force. And the muscle spindles that are little muscles themselves, and they sense the muscle length and muscle velocity. And I have a little video here that nicely demonstrates what it means to have no proprioception.
Charles Fried has lost control of his body. A rare virus has ravaged his nervous system, leaving him with no sense of touch below the neck and unable to sense how his limbs are moving. Charles is not paralyzed, but he has lost his proprioception. the hidden sixth sense that tells the brain where the body is in space. Proprioception is so basic to our experience of being in the world that most of us are unaware that we have it.
So if you miss this proprioceptive feedback, so if you still have vision, if you still have visual information, it's clearly not enough. And you maybe observe that this guy is really moving very slowly. So do you have any idea why this guy is moving so slowly? And it's a bit related to what Tim already talked about the visual system. So why do you think he's not moving faster? Any ideas?
Only knows where the limbs are because he sees them.
Yeah, and what's the problem with seeing things? It's
slow.
It's slow. So then you have a feedback pathway in which you have considerable time delays, about 250 milliseconds. And if you know something about feedback control, that if there's a time delay, it limits the loop gains. So it can only be very low loop gain control, and that makes it all slow. You always react slow. But another important system is the vestibular organ, the canals and the otoliths. The canals are a kind of gyroscopes, in-purpose gyroscopes, and the otoliths are a kind of accelerometers. And this is also a movie that shows how important those receptors that most of us are unaware of are during, in this case, walking. This is a movie on the left of Brian Day. Another movie on the right I just collected from the internet. And you just have two electrodes behind the ear, and the guys there are just remote controlling the stimulating electrically those vestibular system. What you do mostly when you stimulate the vestibular system in this way is you're stimulating the canals. So not the otoliths, but the canals. So if you want to control somebody, the best thing is just put some electrodes on, keep your eyes closed, and you can get people anywhere you want. But maybe you also see a difference between the left and the right movie. So what's the difference between the left and the right movie? Both have the eyes closed, because if you have your eyes open, the effect is much less pronounced. Just a kind of a visual question. So what is the difference in both movies? So yeah, so the lady, when she's perturbed, she's moving sideways, while the guy, he has his head tilted forward, he is turning, it's kind of yaw perturbation. So, and the idea is that since you have behind each ear 3 of the canals, and if you sum those 3 different canals, you have a factor that moves a bit like this behind your, from your head. And if you stimulate the canals, it's just a kind of rotation about this factor. So if you are standing like this, and you have stimulation around this factor, it's just roll. And if you then walk, you also will just have to step sideward due to stability constraints. But if you tilt your head forward, then it's actually a rotation about the yaw axis. So that's the reason why those 2 people behave differently. And actually, it's a quite old organ that survived many dramatic events in nature. And the funny thing is that the structure didn't change. So it's really kind of really robust design nature came up with. And I talk about sensory reweighting, and already Tim informed you about sensory reweighting, so I do it quite quickly. So one way to study reweighting is done by the way Bob Peterka did this, because this is a picture of Bob Peterka's lab. And what Bob does, that he puts subjects on a platform, and then the platform support surface can rotate with an axis collinear with the ankle joint, and it can also rotate the physical scene. And if you do that, in this case it's with eyes closed and only the support surface is tilted. If you then increase the amplitude of the rotation, like here, you see that in the first instance also the body sway increases, then for larger amplitudes it more or less saturates. So you don't see any further increase in body sway. Which is a good thing, because if you didn't do this, if you didn't suppress this kind of rotation stimulus, you would fall over, and that hurts. And another nice way to visualize and quantify this kind of sensory reweighting, which we call this, is by looking at the frequency response functions from the stimulus to the body sway. And if you then look at the gains, if the amplitude increases, you see that the gain becomes lower, which means that you become less sensitive to this kind of sensory perturbation. And to put it in a very simplistic schematic scheme, this is the picture. So you have, in this case, two feedback loops. One is the vestibular feedback loop, one is the proprioceptive feedback loop. Eyes are closed, so there's no vision in this experiment. And if you then rotate the support surface, it's mathematically equivalent that by applying a kind of sensory perturbation in your proprioceptive channel. And if you can maybe recognize if you put a perturbation here, that it will also show up in the body sway, so it will perturb you. So an effective strategy is to lower this gain. But if you do this, then probably the loop gain will become too small, then you will lose stability, because there's gravity. So the loop gain should always be higher than the gravitational stiffness. So for that reason, you have to increase the vestibular loop gain. And that's what is the kind of central reweighting. So if you have a perturbation that perturbs the sensory channel, you are going to downweight that weight, the sensory weight. At the same time, you have to upweight other sensory channels. So this is another way of showing the results. So again, here you see the surface tilt amplitude, and here you see the body sway, the root and square of it, and you see that the solid line first increases and then separates. And this is what we call the body sway evoked by the stimulus. Because normally we do this kind of experiments 10 times in a row, so you repeat the perturbation. But humans are always a bit variable, so you get a lot of variation over responses, and you can also quantify that. And the quantification of this variability is what we call the remnant sway. And the strange thing then is that the remnant sway increases. So you doing this kind of downweighting of your proprioceptive information and upweighting the vestibular information, your response becomes much more noisier. And something similar we also observed just during standing on a platform that moved. So here, again, we applied mechanical perturbations. And if you do those perturbations, you can identify the feedback controller that, as Tim explained before. But you can also, again, then quantify this kind of remnant. So the body sway that is not correlated with perturbation. And you see that if you then look at the notional signal ratio, this remnant sway is quite high. But the point I want to make here is that if you close your eyes and do the same experiment, that is remnant sway, so the body sway that is not correlated to the perturbation, increases, and especially at low frequencies, because those frequency bins here, they correspond to the low frequency range. So now we come up with a modeling phase. So the question is, can we model all those kind of experimental findings? Can we predict what happens? So can we predict sensory reweighting? And can we also explain the cause of spontaneous sway and remnant sway? And can we also predict the feedback mechanisms, so how high the feedback gains are? And we started with this a long time ago, and the first maybe obvious thing to model this is by applying a state estimator. So here you see again a schematic scheme of the problem. Somebody standing, looking at visual scenes, sitting on a platform that can rotate, can translate. You still have all the sensors like vision, outlets, canals, spindles, sensor dynamics, time relays. And then often control theory learns us that the optimal way to control this problem is to first make a kind of optimal estimate by using a Kalman filter, and then apply a kind of optimal controller. And that's what we did. And the good thing about this model is that it predicts that, for example, if you close your eyes, your sway becomes more variable. But if you think about Kalman filtering or estimation, optimal estimation, it's a very powerful tool, but you have to acknowledge that there are three important things to guarantee optimality. That is, first, that you have an accurate model of your problem, your plant, your sensor dynamics, but you also have to specify the statistical properties of your external perturbations and your sensor noise. And if you think about that in our context, posture control, it means that you have to specify how much perturbations there are, or how much the visceral surround will move, or how much the support surface will move. And that's, of course, exactly the problem that our brain has to solve. So if I'm going to set those properties into the model, then I'm trying to solve the same problem as the brain. And the problem is that you never know those properties beforehand. You have to find this out, what the environment is doing. So this is a scheme of an of a normal Kalman filter. So the idea is that you have a system, you have an internal model, and then you have this Kalman gain, and then you can update the internal states of your model. But normally this Kalman gain is more or less fixed and determined by those statistical properties of the perturbation and the sensor noise. But there's also something that's called adaptive Kalman filtering, and the idea is that you use the sensory error not only to feed back through this Kalman gain, but you also analyze the sensory error to identify the properties of your sensor noise and the properties of the external perturbations. And then the Kalman gain will change all the time, dependent on what the environment is doing. And the nice thing is that if we apply this kind of modeling to experiments done by Bob Turka a long time ago, almost 20 years, then you see that it can predict the sensory reweighting. So again, this is a gain of visceral stimulus to body sway, and again you see that all those gains become smaller if the perturbation increases, so you downweight your visual information, and you can see that the global trend is well predicted by this model, this adaptive Kalman model. So this was very nice, and we were pretty satisfied with that, but still we had to set some model properties, because also in this model you have to you have to say how much sensory noise there is. And this we just we just hand-tuned those properties, but we never measured them, and they are not known. And also we still assumed that people minimize the root mean square of their estimation error and the root mean square of their body sway, which is also something that people could minimize, but you could also minimize other things like effort or body sway velocity. So therefore we, together with Bob Turka, we did a kind of general optimization. So this is the model. So here you see again those vestibular feedback pathway. You see the proprioceptive feedback pathway. There's also a torque loop there, which is very important to when you have long-lasting perturbations. There's also a kind of muscle tendon feedback pathway to model the intrinsic stiffness of the muscles. And we use this model to predict, to use the data that was collected by Bob Turka to identify all the model parameters. And then the next step was to identify also the noise properties. And to my knowledge, this was never done before. So a lot of people just put in noise. No one tried to identify those noise sources, and we tried to identify also those noise sources. And if you then know the model parameters, model structure, and you also know the internal noise sources, you can then predict behavior. So what we then did in the next step, stage 3, is to see what kind of criterion minimizes the data we collected. So for example, looking by minimizing body sway, minimizing energy, minimizing jerk. And as the last step, we then removed all external perturbations from the model, and then you have a model that is just in a kind of quite standing situation, and see whether the model can predict spontaneous sway. Well, here you see that the model shows that you downweight proprioceptive information and upweight your vestibular information. And you also see that the identified noise properties of your vestibular system is much larger than the noise properties of your proprioceptive system, proprioceptive noise. So what it means, if you increase the weight of your receptive channels, you will amplify the vestibular noise, which is much higher than the proprioceptive noise. So it means that the amount of noise that's being injected into the system becomes higher. And for that reason, If you use more vestibular information, your body sway becomes much more noisier. And you can also predict then the neural feedback gains. So this is the predicted feedback gain. And if you then look at what's predicted by minimizing, for example, position, you see that if you minimize position, body sway, the gains are much higher than we fitted. And the best combination was found by minimization of torque and body sway velocity, which is minimization of something like linked to energy. And also, if you then remove all perturbations, you see that the model and the experimental data of quite stance, just spontaneous sway, nicely fits. And I think I have to stop here, and the conclusions are on the slide. Thank you.
We have time for some questions.
So I usually expect that in order for a person to decide to upweight or downweight a sensor, that they should have some contextual information. And I'm wondering, here all they're getting is more stimulus. So how do they know to change the weight?
Well, I think in many studies of motor learning and adaptation, people are not really conscious about their adaptation. It's all done on a kind of subconscious level. And especially for those very small perturbations, which are maybe just 0.05 degrees, sometimes you even don't notice that your support surface is rotating. But still you see a clear response and also an adaptation of the responses.
And that adaptation takes place over some period of time?
That's an interesting question. So I think Tim and I now spoke about, or I think we demonstrated that people adapt to different sensory perturbations, so that you downweight your information from a system that is perturbed. But the time scale on which it happens, that is under investigation. Normally, I think Tim did some work on that. So what happens if you downweight a channel? It's going pretty fast, because then it has a negative effect. So if you're, for example, standing on the visual scene and it's moving, then it will perturb you. So you have to downweight that information quickly. Then on the opposite, if it becomes stable again, the visual scene, then there is some benefit to increase this visual weight again, but there's no need to do this very quickly. So the adaptation, the upweighting then is taking much more time. So there's an asymmetry in upweighting and downweighting sensory information. And I think Teresa Klein, she modified a bit this adaptive model of mine. And I think also the model predicted this asymmetry in down and upweighting of sensory information.
And when you say asymmetry, so this is on the order of seconds or a minute or?
I think that downweighting goes almost in a second, but the upweighting again, so if you go back to a stable visual scene, I think it takes seconds. But Tim did a study, so maybe it's more or less correct.
Pretty consistent, but that's property.
Yeah.
I don't recall hearing you discuss the canal receptors in the plantar sole of the foot. Would that fall into proprioception?
Yeah, they are not important at all during postural control, during sensory reweighting. And the reason for that is because the time delays with those mechanoreceptors, they are much higher. So they are in order of visual system. And you don't need to include them to account for the data we collected. But they are known to modulate, for example, positive force feedback. So if you look at walking, there is some evidence that you use positive force feedback around your ankles, and that is positive force feedback is a function of your gait cycle, and there's some evidence that modulation of this positive feedback loop is modulated by mechanoreceptors in your on your feet.